What if everything you've ever known about Pythagoras was only the surface of something much deeper? What if the man behind the triangle formula you learned in school wasn't just a mathematician, but a spiritual master who held secret knowledge about the soul, the universe, and the hidden harmony that connects everything? Most people remember him for a simple equation about right-angled triangles, but very few know that Pythagoras was one of the most mysterious and enlightened figures in ancient history. Someone who believed that numbers were alive, that music could heal, and that the soul travels through lifetimes in search of truth. Pythagoras was not just a thinker. He was a seeker, a man who traveled far and wide, spending years in Egypt studying ancient wisdom with priests who guarded powerful secrets. He didn't just observe the world, he listened to it, deeply and in silence. He created a school unlike any other, not open to everyone, but only to those willing to commit to a life of inner transformation. The students in his school didn't speak for years. They stayed in complete silence, learning how to hear with their hearts before they could ever receive a single teaching. Because what was taught there wasn't ordinary knowledge. It was sacred. It was dangerous. It had the power to change everything. His teachings were never meant to be written in textbooks. They weren't just about math. They were about the soul, about death, rebirth, healing, and harmony. He believed that our true identity doesn't live in the body or the name or the story we carry, but in the soul that moves through lifetimes, like a flame passed from one candle to the next. He said that the soul remembers everything. It just forgets at birth, and life is a journey of remembering. Pythagoras saw the world as sound. Everything moved through vibration. Everything sang a song, not just in music, but in nature, in thought, in the stars. He believed that the planets made music as they moved, and that we are born into this music so deeply that we don't even hear it anymore. The way a fish doesn't know it's surrounded by water. But that music is real. It's always there. It's the hidden harmony behind everything. To him, numbers were not just tools for counting. They were alive. They were spiritual forces. One meant creation. Two meant opposites. Three meant balance. Four meant order. Each number had a soul, a purpose, and these numbers shaped everything. Music, nature, the stars, even the soul. He discovered this by watching how musical instruments worked. He saw that the most beautiful sounds came from simple, perfect ratios. And then he saw those same ratios in the way flowers grew, in the way planets moved, in the way the body was formed. It was all connected. This realization showed him that the universe wasn't chaos. It was order. And that order wasn't cold or mechanical. It was full of life, full of spirit. It was sacred. He believed that if you truly understood numbers, you could understand the hidden structure of everything. You could hear the harmony beneath the noise. You could feel the music that holds the stars together. He and his students used this knowledge not just to think, but to live. They believed music could heal the mind and body. Before sleep, they would listen to specific melodies to calm the mind and wash away the day's thoughts. In the morning, they would use other music to wake the soul and bring it into alignment. They believed that sound could shape the spirit. That music wasn't just art. It was medicine. It was prayer. It was a path. Today, science is starting to understand what Pythagoras already knew. Modern physics talks about vibration as the foundation of matter. Studies show that sound affects our cells, our brains, our health. Healing frequencies and sound therapy are becoming popular again. But Pythagoras was teaching this thousands of years ago, when it was dangerous to even suggest that the universe had a soul. He believed that the goal of life was to live in harmony, not just with the world, but with yourself, to find balance in your thoughts, your emotions, your actions, to live in rhythm with nature, to be still enough to hear the silent music that runs through all things. He taught that the most powerful knowledge isn't found in books. It's found in silence, in vibration, in deep listening. And maybe that's why, even today, we say things like, "That resonated with me." Because when something is true, we don't just understand it. We feel it. It vibrates inside us. He saw the universe as a harp, and each soul as a string. When we're out of tune, we suffer. When we're in tune, we feel peace. Everything flows. And in those moments of harmony, we become part of the eternal song of creation. He also believed that the body is not who we really are. It's just a temporary place the soul passes through. Our real identity is the soul, eternal, timeless, and full of memory. He taught that we are born again and again, each life shaping the next. The soul, like a flame, moves from one form to another, carrying with it the lessons of every life. And how we live now determines what comes next. These ideas weren't invented by him alone. He learned them from the Egyptian priests, who believed that the human being is made of many parts: the body, the energy, the mind, the spirit, and more. And that after death, each part takes a different path. He also studied the Orphic mysteries of Greece, which taught that the soul is a divine being trapped in a limited body. That's why he said the body is a prison, not to be hated, but to be used as a place of transformation, a laboratory, a forge, a chance to refine the soul. He taught that the soul must be purifying to break free from the cycle of birth and rebirth. But that purification doesn't come from rituals or public displays. It comes from daily self-discipline, from silence, from understanding yourself, from controlling your desires, from eating in a way that doesn't harm others, from using words carefully, from listening to music that uplifts the soul. This was the true alchemy, not turning metal into gold, but turning confusion into clarity, ignorance into wisdom. His teachings were also a lesson in humility. He believed that any soul could become anything. You might be rich in one life and poor in the next, a scholar today and a bird tomorrow. Every form of life carries a piece of the divine. That's why he and his followers didn't eat meat, not because of diet, but out of compassion. They believed that every creature has a soul, and that hurting another being harms your own soul. Every life is sacred. These beliefs are still alive in Eastern religions like Hinduism and Buddhism. But in ancient Greece, they were radical. Saying that the soul lived beyond death was bold. Saying it could return as a tree or a fish was seen as madness. But Pythagoras didn't care what others thought. He knew what he had seen. He knew what he had felt. And he taught that life is not just about surviving. It's about remembering. Remembering who you really are. Remembering the soul. He called this remembering anamnesis, the awakening of memory. The soul knows the truth. but forgets it at birth. Philosophy, music, numbers, silence. These are not just tools. They are doorways. They help the soul remember. They help us return to harmony. And maybe that is the real legacy of Pythagoras. Not just a theorem, but a path of remembering, a path of tuning the soul, a path of listening to the hidden song that plays through everything, a path back to who we really are. Pythagoras is often remembered as a mathematician, the man who gave the world a simple formula for right-angled triangles. But what many people don't realize is that he wasn't really focused on numbers just to solve problems or make calculations. What he was trying to share was something much deeper, a way of seeing the universe, of understanding the soul, and of living with truth and harmony. When he taught, he wasn't simply passing on mathematical knowledge. He was giving people a map, a spiritual map, to help them escape being stuck in their physical selves and start becoming something more, something sacred. He believed that every human being was more than just a body moving through the world. Each person had a soul, and that soul had a path. His teachings were meant to help people awaken that soul and begin walking that path with full awareness. He didn't create a typical school. He built a special kind of community, something closer to a temple that looked like a school from the outside, but was really a place for inner transformation. He gathered people from different places, men and women, young and old, who were all ready to leave behind the ordinary way of living in search of something deeper. They came to a city called Croton in southern Italy, where this quiet movement began. It wasn't about fame or power, or even knowledge in the usual sense. It was about harmony, about living in alignment with a higher truth, and about becoming fully alive from within. But this path wasn't easy or free. To join the school, one had to go through a very serious and difficult process. At the very beginning, the new student wasn't allowed to speak at all. Not for a few hours, not even for a few days, sometimes not for months, and in rare cases, not for years. Their only task was to listen, not just to the words of others, but to everything around them, their own thoughts, the silence, the inner noise that fills the mind when the outer world becomes quiet. Pythagoras believed that real wisdom begins not with speaking, but with deep listening. He saw that most people talk too much, filling every space with words, but those words often have no weight because they come from a mind that hasn't learned to be still. So silence became a ritual, a kind of inner cleansing. It forced the student to slow down and pay attention, to see how much of what we say is unnecessary, to feel the chaos inside. And slowly, through that silence, the soul begins to prepare itself for something bigger. After passing this test of silence, the student would start receiving teachings. But they didn't get everything at once. The lessons came slowly, carefully, step by step, and only as the student was ready. This wasn't about memorizing facts. It was about becoming someone new from the inside out. Knowledge was given like seeds, planted in the heart, and it would grow in its own time. Only those who showed maturity, discipline, and sincerity were allowed to go deeper. Once someone was accepted into the inner circle of the school, their life changed completely. Every part of their daily routine became structured and meaningful. They woke up and went to sleep at specific times. They ate food that was simple and pure. They studied the stars, the movements of the planets, the harmony of music, the mysteries of numbers, and the stillness of meditation. They lived together as a group, but each person was taught to build their own spiritual strength. It was a life of community, but also of deep personal responsibility. There was no religion, no dogma, no need to believe blindly. It was a kind of monastery without walls, where the practice wasn't worship, but awareness. Even the smallest things, how they moved, how they breathed, how they thought, became tools for awakening. Every action had meaning. Every habit was a doorway into deeper understanding. One of their common practices was quietly meditating on the pentagram, a five-pointed star that represented balance and inner harmony. They believed in the power of symbols. They believed that sacred shapes and numbers held messages from the universe. They also made vows, serious promises, that were never taken lightly. One of the most sacred vows was made while holding a symbol called the tetractys, a triangle made by adding together the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. These four numbers, when added together, make 10. And to the followers of Pythagoras, 10 was not just a number. It was the symbol of everything. It held within it the structure of the whole world, the point, the line, the surface, and the solid. It showed how reality builds upon itself, from the smallest moment to the largest truth. Swearing an oath on the tetractys was like touching the soul of the universe. It wasn't about rules. It was about committing yourself to truth, to order, and to living with integrity at every level of your life. The Pythagorean school wasn't just about gaining knowledge. It was about becoming the kind of person who could hold that knowledge with grace and responsibility. Pythagoras believed that if someone knew many things but lacked wisdom, kindness, or self-control, their knowledge would become dangerous or meaningless. So he focused on developing character. Every student was trained to be just, courageous, balanced, and moderate in all things. They weren't trying to produce clever people. They were shaping souls. Over time, these students started to influence the world around them. Many of them became leaders, lawmakers, and spiritual guides. Their ideas started shaping cities and policies. But not everyone was happy about that. The more the Pythagoreans grew in influence, the more people feared them. Rumors spread that they were a secret society trying to control everything from behind the scenes. In a world driven by ambition, greed, and conflict, a peaceful and disciplined community based on truth and harmony began to look like a threat. Fear turned into hatred. The order was attacked. Their buildings were burned. Some members were killed. Pythagoras had to escape. And with his escape, much of the knowledge was lost. But not all of it. Some of it survived in the form of stories, symbols, quiet sayings, and lessons passed down in whispers. It was as if the school had been broken on the outside, but stayed alive in the hearts of those who had truly listened. What they had learned couldn't be destroyed because it was not written on paper. It was written in their lives, in the way they breathed, the way they moved through the world, the way they treated others. Their silence had become their teacher, and that silence carried the knowledge forward, generation after generation. Today, people might find it hard to believe that such a school once existed. But maybe what's really hard to believe is how far the world has moved away from the values they lived by. We live in a time where people are always speaking, always rushing, always trying to be heard. but very few are truly listening. We value noise over quiet, speed over depth, image over essence. In the Pythagorean way of life, philosophy wasn't just something you talked about. It was something that shaped how you lived every single day. It touched how you slept, how you ate, how you related to time. It made even the smallest action sacred. Tying your shoes, looking at a tree, listening to music. Each of these things became a way to tune yourself to the deeper order of the cosmos. Pythagoras saw numbers as something sacred, not just as tools for measuring, but as living principles of truth. To him, each number had meaning. Each shape had a message. He believed that numbers were the silent language of the universe, and if you looked closely, you could see them everywhere. In the stars, in the seasons, in the patterns of leaves, in the rhythm of music, even in your own heartbeat. That's why he said everything is number, not because life is just math, but because life follows a pattern, a sacred order, a quiet rhythm that connects all things. He believed the universe itself was built using these patterns. Before there was form, there was relation. Before there was matter, there was number. And everything that exists is shaped by these invisible forces. He and his students studied these truths with deep devotion. They examined the proportions of the human body, the movements of planets, the sounds of musical notes, the geometry of sacred shapes. Whenever they found harmony, when something repeated across different parts of life, they saw it as a message from something divine. Geometry became sacred to them because it showed the invisible through the visible. A triangle, a circle, a spiral. These were not just drawings. They were teachings. They were like letters in the alphabet of the universe. And studying them was like reading a spiritual book written in silence. Their favorite symbol remained the tetractys, the triangle made of the first four numbers. It wasn't just a number game. It was a spiritual truth. 1 was the point, the beginning. 2 was the line, the connection. 3 was the surface, the idea of space. 4 was the solid, the full expression of form. When you put them together, they make 10, the number of completion. This pattern explained everything that existed. It was used in sacred rituals, in meditations, in oaths. It reminded them that nothing in life was random, that behind every event, every form, every breath, there was order, there was intention, there was a sacred code guiding everything. This way of seeing the world didn't end when the school was destroyed. It quietly flowed into many traditions. The Jewish mystics known as the Kabbalists used numbers to connect heaven and earth. Alchemists built their experiments around sacred geometry. Artists used these patterns in cathedrals, temples, and ancient monuments. And even today, we still see their fingerprints everywhere. In physics, scientists are finding that even the tiniest particles follow math. In biology, we now know DNA follows proportional patterns. In digital art, we use fractals, endlessly repeating geometric designs. Everywhere we look, we find proof of what Pythagoras once said, that the universe is not just mechanical, it is beautifully and intelligently designed. But this design isn't cold or robotic. It's filled with beauty, with spirit, with life. It's as if the universe is a great piece of music, a sacred painting, a divine story written in shapes and sounds and numbers. And when you begin to see that story, you change. You begin to live with more awe, more care, more peace. You begin to realize that even in chaos, there is a pattern. Even in confusion, there is a deeper harmony waiting to be seen. This is what Pythagoras tried to give the world. Not just math, not just theory, but a way of seeing, a way of awakening, a way of remembering that life is sacred, that silence is powerful, and that truth speaks in ways beyond words. He didn't want people to worship him. He wanted people to understand. And to understand, we must go beyond thinking. We must become quiet inside. We must make space for a different kind of knowing, the kind that comes not from books, but from stillness. His teachings were never truly lost. They just became hidden in the architecture of temples, in the rhythm of the breath, in the silence between notes in a song, in the patterns of nature, in the quiet movements of the stars. And maybe if something in you feels called by this message, it means you are ready to listen, ready to remember, ready to walk the path that leads not just through the world, but into the soul. And if you've heard this music, then your journey has already begun.